Okay, on my left today we have Representative Larry Springer, whom you all know runs a small business that you probably all like to patronize. He was elected to the House in 2004. He serves in the 45th District and is Deputy Majority Leader. And to his left, Senator Marko Liias, who also has a business background. He started out in small business in the construction industry. He was elected to the House in 2008. He's been in the Senate since 2014, and he is the Democratic floor leader in the Senate. So I will turn it over to them, and you can speak in whichever order you care to.
Normally, I would choose to go second. We usually try to let the Senate speak first, and then we come up and make all the corrections that are necessary. First of all, thanks for the invitation. The Majority Leader, Pat Sullivan, was going to join me today, but at the last minute we had a little budget disagreement with some of our budgeting around the school funding thing, so he's back in his office working on that. So. I guess the only message I have to deliver is that as we go through what's going to prove to be a fairly difficult session, given the obligations we have under the McCleary mandate, we're going to need help. Both sides of the aisle and both sides of the rotunda are going to need help from stakeholders out there that really care about education in particular. And that includes AWB. These are going to be some contentious times, and we all need to be pulling as much as we possibly can in the same direction, knowing that that's not always possible, and there's nothing wrong with that, but the active engagement of all of you in those issues is really critical. It's also fair to say that, well, if you walked around campus, you would think the only thing on anybody's mind is McCleary. That's actually not true. There are other issues that are on our plate. Three I'll highlight because they are three that I will be pretty intimately involved in. They come under the category of no deed goes unpunished. And that includes the dealing with water allocation issues around the Hearst and Foster decisions. We have about, Jan, I don't know, 5-7 bills out there all dealing with this issue. Our job is going to be to put that together into a package that can get through both houses. That is a huge issue, especially for rural Washington. We have paid family leave and equal pay. Both of those issues have been around for a few years. There are efforts to address both of those issues on both sides of the rotunda. So there's certainly the commitment that we want to try and do something. I think our message has certainly been to our caucus, much better for us to deal with those types of issues here at the legislature than rely on the initiative process. I know you're all not particularly fond of initiatives. They are a very insufficient way of dealing with complex public policy. And while it's an important aspect of our Constitution and nobody argues with that, it is best if we can get it done at the legislative level. So we're going to keep working on those. I'll be in the middle of both of those as well. We have our first equal pay sort of stakeholder group meeting in the House tomorrow at noon. That's sort of I characterize it as a fact-finding mission. Let's figure out where the pinch points are and then sit down and try and work something out. So those are three really big issues that I know AWB is going to be really critically involved in as well. So with that, let me turn it over to Senator Liias, and he can correct whatever I just said. So.
Thank you, Larry. There's not much to correct. I do appreciate that as I was being introduced as farther to the left of Larry Springer, which I thought was apt. I'm Marko Liias, the Democratic floor leader. Senator Nelson, our leader, sends her regrets. Unfortunately, Her sister is not doing well, and she's traveled to spend some time with her, so she wishes she could be here, but I know we all send our best thoughts to her and her family as they work through this. I note, as we sit in this room, that the lobbyists that are sitting in the very back of the room are the ones that I would expect to be in the very back rows in school or in church or in hearings, and the ones in the front are the ones, so I'm glad that you observe those behaviors even here. As Senate Democrats, our number one and overriding mission for the last couple of years has been to elevate and stress the importance of taking action on fully and fairly funding our public schools. We continue to push this issue with our Senate colleagues, and we appreciate the House's early action on a levy cliff bill to help at least suspend the sense of crisis that's facing our school districts around the state. We also really wanted to see more progress out of the Education Funding Task Force over the interim. Our two leaders on that effort, Senator Billig and Senator Rolfes, I think really tried to think creatively about solutions, and I wish we could have seen more progress in the interim. I worked on transportation a couple years ago, and we had an excellent model there where we had 4 senators, 2 from each party, that really hashed out some of the tough details ahead of an announcement, ahead of an agreement, and we started, as I was sharing with Representative Springer, we started the discussion off in a place that was already down the field where we were closer to compromise. So I think all of us recognize that the inability of that task force to get to some kind of consensus on points has set us back and means that we're going to be here a lot longer than any of us would like to or had hoped at the outset. The Senate Republican Education Plan, I think, illustrates the sort of divide that exists. I think the two parties have very different and divergent views of how to address these issues, and the less time we spend arguing about our divergent views and arguing more about and discussing more how we get to consensus, I think will lead us there, and unfortunately we haven't gotten there so far. Senate Democrats are also committed to really working on building prosperity in all parts of Washington. I think all of us saw the election results last fall and saw that not every Washingtonian feels like they're plugged into our shared prosperity. Our districts in the Puget Sound region have low unemployment and great economic growth, but that when you get just a few miles outside of that Puget Sound corridor, it's a different story in Washington. So what can we do to advance economic opportunity in the rural parts of our state, in eastern Washington and western Washington? What can we do to work with struggling families all over the state that are trying to get into community college, trying to afford education, paid family leave, trying to take care of their families in these tough economic times? I think we all want to work together to advance prosperity for everybody. Certainly Senator Tacko's been an articulate spokesman on the need to invest in our more rural communities. Both him and Senator VandeWeghe bring that experience on the ground and are helping our caucus get educated on ways that we can provide more access to broadband in rural areas. How can we work with timber-affected communities to invest more? What are other things we can do to spread prosperity to parts of the state that aren't experiencing it? And then the final thing I think we're really committed to is making sure that as our national administration makes decisions in Washington, D.C., that here in Washington State we continue to uphold our Washington State values of tolerance and inclusion, equality for all of our people, and the sign agrees with me. And so, I mean, I think that the recent immigration executive order is an illustration of that, you know, working together between the public and private sector, making the case that our inclusive and diverse population in Washington is one of our strengths. It's part of what has enabled so much economic growth and opportunity in this state, and how can we build on that strength and ensure that all Washingtonians have the ability to access good jobs, good education, participate in our economy, and how do we make sure that we're protecting the civil rights and the responsibilities and opportunities of every Washingtonian, regardless of where they came from, regardless of their religion, regardless of who they love, that everybody has a seat at the table, everybody has a role to play, everybody has a voice in our economy. So those are kind of our broad priorities this session. You know, in the Senate, we're faced this unique situation with one of our senators not necessarily being with us all the time, and so we're trying to advance a more bipartisan mode in operating the Senate, and I think we've seen some progress in committee chairs and ranking members sitting down and talking about issues that will be discussed in committee. Certainly on the floor, we're trying to talk to our Republican colleagues about what bills come to the floor, how can we move things on a bipartisan basis. So I hope that the last week or two of progress on that, we can continue to build towards the end of session, and then maybe take that goodwill and partnership and trying to export it to the education funding discussion where I think it's sorely needed. So those are sort of opening comments. I would love to take any questions. I know Larry would as well. Senator McCoy may join us, but he also was pulled into, I don't know if it was the same meeting or a similar discussion. So,
well, thank you again, Senator John McCoy, 38th Legislative District, which is Tulalip, Marysville, Everett. And as some of you know, I've done a lot of work in information technology because that's where the Air Force trained me, beginning in 1965. And so going through all that. And then, you know, my tribe, Tulalip, I am a Tulalip citizen, recruited me to come home. Leave a very good job in McLean, Virginia, to come home and do economic development. Well, I came home, and you know, a lot of things that you've been talking about. I came home to a situation where the majority of the people, for those that qualified, were living from one unemployment check to the other. Nothing else. Those that didn't qualify for unemployment were selling firewood, fishing, berry picking, those type of activities to survive. Okay, I began economic development, and the first thing I had to do, because I came from the outside world, in essence, if we were to do economic development, we had to get high-speed communications. So I convinced the tribe to allow me to, because I could not get the telecoms to cross the interstate. Because when I was on the team that automated the White House during Reagan's first term. So I knew how to do that stuff. But when I went home, all I could get was dial-up. So you can imagine I was one unhappy camper. So I had to convince the tribal council to allow me to upgrade the entire communication system so that we could do real economic development. So they allowed me to do that, do a number of other things, infrastructure work, and so I'm the architect of Quilceda Village. So Quilceda Village was, I like to see the old picture before I started, a lot of scrub trees, deer paths, stuff like that. It was an old Army training ground. And so when we were doing the groundwork, we encountered some things that we had to clean up. Well, actually have the Army Corps of Engineers clean up. But so we went through all that and developed Quilceda Village, which today is still a pretty successful operation. If it wasn't for Boeing and the Navy, we'd be the largest employer in the state, in Snohomish County. So, doing quite well. They're continuing to do what they need to do. But the fact remains, you know, I watched mothers going to a grocery store when I first got home, buying nothing but staples. Then they moved up to the higher end meats and foods. And now they're going back to natural foods, which I find quite enjoyable to watch them want to do natural food. So a lot of them are starting their own gardens, which is great. So, so that's what drives me when I'm trying to do work. That's why a lot of you, wonder, why does John McCoy keep harping on internet for the rural areas? Because we're not going to get any substantial businesses out there until we get the internet out there and address some of the water issues. So that's what you've seen me and why I'm so worked up over the rural area and finding jobs and making those happen. You know, on the R&D, you know, some folks, you know, don't have a problem with it, but the problem they do have with it is the research is done here in state, but the development and manufacturing is happening out of state or out of country. That's what makes them grumpy. So you need to think about that. So we got a lot of rural areas that could use some help in some type of manufacturing out there. So if you're going to do the research and create a product, how about keeping it in state? So happy to answer any questions. Thank you.